Welcome to our channel. We hope you enjoy our narrated stories. The trouble with Harrowby Hall was that it was haunted. What was worse, the ghost did not content itself with merely appearing at the bedside of the afflicted person who saw it, but persisted in remaining there for 1 mortal hour before it would disappear. It never appeared except on Christmas Eve, and then as the clock was striking 12, in which respect alone was it lacking in that originality which in these days is a sine qua non of success in spectral life. The owners of Harrowby Hall had done their utmost to rid themselves of the damp and dewy lady who rose up out of the best bedroom floor at midnight, but without avail. They had tried stopping the clock so that the ghost would not know when it was midnight, but she made her appearance just the same, with that fearful, miasmatic personality of hers. And there she would stand until everything about her was thoroughly saturated. Then the owners of Harrowby Hall caulked up every crack in the floor with the very best quality of hemp, and over this were placed layers of tar and canvas. The walls were made waterproof, and the doors and windows likewise, the proprietors having conceived the notion that the unexercised lady would find it difficult to leak into the room after these precautions had been taken. But even this did not suffice. The following Christmas Eve she appeared as promptly as before, and frightened the occupant of the room quite out of his senses by sitting down alongside of him and gazing with her cavernous blue eyes into his. And he noticed, too, that in her long, aqueously bony fingers, bits of dripping seaweed were entwined, the ends hanging down, and these ends she drew across his forehead until he became like one insane. And then he swooned away and was found unconscious in his bed the next morning by his host, simply saturated with seawater and fright, from the combined effects of which he never recovered, dying 4 years later of pneumonia and nervous prostration at the age of 78. The next year, the master of Harrowby Hall decided not to have the best spare bedroom opened at all, thinking that perhaps the ghost's thirst for making herself disagreeable would be satisfied by haunting the furniture. But the plan was as unavailing as the many that had preceded it. The ghost appeared as usual in the room. That is, it was supposed she did, for the hangings were dripping wet the next morning, and in the parlor below the haunted room a great damp spot appeared on the ceiling. Finding no one there, she immediately set out to learn the reason why, and she chose none other to haunt than the owner of the Harrowby himself. She found him in his own cozy room, drinking whiskey undiluted, and felicitating himself upon having foiled her ghostship, when all of a sudden the curl went out of his hair, his whiskey bottle filled and overflowed, and he was himself in a condition similar to that of a man who has fallen into a water butt. When he recovered from the shock, which was a painful one, he saw before him the lady of the cavernous eyes and seaweed fingers. The sight was so unexpected and so terrifying that he fainted, but immediately came to, because of the vast amount of water in his hair, which, trickling down over his face, restored his consciousness. Now it so happened that the master of Harrowby was a brave man, and while he was not particularly fond of interviewing ghosts, especially such quenching ghosts as the one before him, he was not to be daunted by an apparition. He had paid the lady the compliment of feigning from the effects of his first surprise, and now that he had come to, he intended to find out a few things he felt he had a right to know. He would have liked to put on a dry suit of clothes first, but the apparition declined to leave him for an instant until her hour was up, and he was forced to deny himself that pleasure. Every time he would move, she would follow him, with the result that Everything she came in contact with got a ducking. In an effort to warm himself up, he approached the fire. An unfortunate move, as it turned out, because it brought the ghost directly over the fire, which was immediately extinguished. The whiskey became utterly valueless as a comforter to his chilled system, because it was by this time diluted to a proportion of 90% of water. The only thing he could do to ward off the evil effects of his encounter he did, and that was to swallow 10 2-grain quinine pills, which he managed to put into his mouth before the ghost had time to interfere. Having done this, he turned with some asperity to the ghost and said, "Far be it from me to be impolite to a woman, madam, but I'm hanged if it wouldn't please me better if you'd stop these infernal visits of yours to this house. Go sit out on the lake if you like that sort of thing. Soak the water butt if you wish, but do not, I implore you, come into a gentleman's house and saturate him and his possessions in this way. It is damned disagreeable." "Henry Hartwick Oglethorpe," said the ghost in a gurgling voice, "you don't know what you're talking about." "Madam," returned the unhappy householder, "I wish that remark was strictly truthful. I was talking about you. It would be shillings and pence, nay, pounds in my pocket, madam, if I did not know of you." "That is a bit of specious nonsense," returned the ghost, throwing a quart of indignation into the face of the master of Harrowby. "It may rank as high as repartee, but as a comment upon my statement that you do not know what you are talking about, it savors of irrelevant impertinence. You do not know that I am compelled to haunt this place year after year by inexorable fate. It is no pleasure to me to enter this house and ruin and mildew everything I touch. I never aspired to be a shower bath, but it is my doom. Do you know who I am?" "No, I don't," returned the master of Harrowby. "I should say you were the Lady of the Lake, or little Sally Waters." "You are a witty man for your years," said the ghost. "Well, my humor is drier than yours will ever be," returned the master. "No doubt. I am never dry. I am the water ghost of Harrowby Hall, and dryness is a quality entirely beyond my wildest hope. I have been the incumbent of this highly unpleasant office for 200 years tonight." "How the deuce did you ever come to get elected?" asked the master. "Through a suicide," replied the spectre. "I am the ghost of that fair maiden whose picture hangs over the mantelpiece in the drawing-room. I should have been your great-great-great-great-great-aunt if I had lived, Henry Hartwick Oglethorpe, for I was the own sister of your great-great-great-great-grandfather." "But what induced you to get this house into such a predicament?" "I was not to blame, sir," returned the lady. "It was my father's fault. He it was who built Harrowby Hall, and the haunted chamber was to have been mine. My father had it furnished in pink and yellow, knowing well that blue and gray formed the only combination of color I could tolerate. He did it merely to spite me, and with what I deem a proper spirit, I declined to live in the room. Whereupon my father said I could live there or on the lawn, he didn't care which. That night I ran from the house and jumped over the cliff into the sea." "That was rash," said the master of Harrowby. "So I've heard," returned the ghost. "If I had known what the consequences were to be, I should not have jumped. But I never really realized what I was doing until after I was drowned. I had been drowned a week when a sea nymph came to me and informed me that I was to be one of her followers forever afterwards, adding that it should be my doom to haunt Harrowby Hall for 1 hour every Christmas Eve throughout the rest of eternity." I was to haunt that room on such Christmas Eves as I found it inhabited, and if it should turn out not to be inhabited, I was and am to spend the allotted hour with the head of the house. I'll sell the place. That you cannot do, for it is also required of me that I shall appear as the deeds are to be delivered to any purchaser, and divulge to him the awful secret of the house. Do you mean to tell me that on every Christmas Eve that I don't happen to have somebody in that guest chamber, you are going to haunt me wherever I may be, ruining my whiskey, taking all the curl out of my hair, extinguishing my fire, and soaking me through to the skin?" demanded the master. "You have stated the case, Oglethorpe, and what is more," said the water ghost, "it doesn't make the slightest difference where you are. If I find that room empty, wherever you may be, I shall douse you with my spectral pres—" Here the clock struck 1, and immediately the apparition faded away. It was perhaps more of a trickle than a fade, but as a disappearance it was complete. "By St. George and his dragon!" ejaculated the master of Harrowby, wringing his hands. "It is guineas to hot cross buns that next Christmas there's an occupant of the spare room, or I spend the night in a bathtub." But the master of Harrowby would have lost his wager had there been anyone there to take him up. For when Christmas Eve came again, he was in his grave, never having recovered from the cold contracted that awful night. Harrowby Hall was closed, and the heir to the estate was in London, where to him in his chambers came the same experience that his father had gone through, saving only that, being younger and stronger, he survived the shock. Everything in his rooms was ruined. His clocks were rusted in the works, a fine collection of watercolor drawings was entirely obliterated by the onslaught of the water ghost, and what was worse, the apartments below his were drenched with the water soaking through the floors, a damage for which he was compelled to pay, and which resulted in his being requested by his landlady to vacate the premises immediately. The story of the visitation inflicted upon his family had gone abroad, and no one could be got to invite him out to any function save afternoon teas and receptions. Fathers of daughters declined to permit him to remain in their houses later than 8 o'clock at night, not knowing but that some emergency might arise in the supernatural world which would require the unexpected appearance of the water ghost in this on nights other than Christmas Eve, and before the mystic hour when weary churchyards, ignoring the rules which are supposed to govern polite society, began to yawn. Nor would the maids themselves have aught to do with him, fearing the destruction by the sudden incursion of aqueous femininity of the costumes which they held most dear. So the heir of Harrowby Hall resolved, as his ancestors for several generations before him had resolved, that something must be done. His first thought was to make one of his servants occupy the haunted rooms at the crucial moment, but in this he tailed, because the servants themselves knew the history of that room and rebelled. None of his friends would consent to sacrifice their personal comfort to his, nor was there to be found in all of England a man so poor as to be willing to occupy the doomed chamber on Christmas Eve for pay. Then the thought came to the heir to have the fireplace in the room enlarged, so that he might evaporate the ghost at its first appearance, and he was felicitating himself upon the ingenuity of his plan when he remembered what his father had told him, how that no fire could withstand the lady's extremely contagious dampness. And then he bethought him of steam pipes. These, he remembered, could lie hundreds of feet deep in water and still retain sufficient heat to drive the water away in a vapor, and as a result of this, thought the haunted room was heated by steam to a withering degree, and the heir for 6 months attended daily the Turkish baths, so that when Christmas Eve came he could himself withstand the awful temperature of the room. The scheme was only partially successful. The water ghost appeared at the specified time and found the heir of Harrowby prepared. But hot as the room was, it shortened her visit by no more than 5 minutes in the hour, during which time the nervous system of the young master was well nigh shattered, and the room itself was cracked and warped to an extent which required the outlay of a large sum of money to remedy. And worse than this, as the last drop of the water ghost was slowly sizzling itself out on the floor, she whispered to her would-be conqueror that his scheme would avail him nothing, because there was still water in great plenty where she came from, and that next year would find her rehabilitated and as exasperatingly saturating as ever. It was then that the natural action of the mind, in going from one extreme to the other, suggested to the ingenious heir of Harrowby the means by which the water ghost was ultimately conquered, and happiness once more came within the grasp of the house of Oglethorpe. The heir provided himself with a warm suit of fur underclothing. Donning this with the furry side in, he placed over it a rubber garment, tight-fitting, which he wore just as a woman wears a jersey. On top of this he placed another set of underclothing, this suit made of wool, and over this was a second rubber garment like the first. Upon his head he placed a light and comfortable diving helmet, and so clad on the following Christmas Eve he awaited the coming of his tormentor. It was a bitterly cold night that brought to a close this 24th day of December. The air outside was still, but within all was quiet, the servants of Harrowby Hall awaiting with beating hearts the outcome of their master's campaign against his supernatural visitor. The master himself was lying on the bed in the haunted room, clad as has already been indicated, and then the clock clanged out the hour of 12. There was a sudden banging of doors, a blast of cold air swept through the halls, the door leading into the haunted chamber flew open, a splash was heard, and the water ghost was seen standing at the side of the heir of Harrowby, from whose outer dress there streamed rivulets of water, but whose own person, deep down under the various garments he wore, was as dry and as warm as he could have wished. "Ha!" said the young master of Harrowby, "I'm glad to see you." "You are the most original man I've met, if that is true," returned the ghost. "May I ask where did you get that hat?" "Certainly, madam," returned the master courteously. "It is a little portable observatory I had made for just such emergencies as this. But tell me, is it true that you are doomed to follow me about for one mortal hour, to stand where I stand, to sit where I sit?" "That is my delectable fate," returned the lady. "Well, go out on the lake," said the master, starting up. "You can't get rid of me that way," returned the ghost. "The water won't swallow me up. In fact, it will just add to my present bulk." "Nevertheless," said the master firmly, "we will go out on the lake." "But my dear sir," returned the ghost, with a pale reluctance, "it is fearfully cold out there. You will be frozen hard before you've been out 10 minutes. "Oh, no, I'll not," replied the master. "I am very warmly dressed. Come." This last in a tone of command that made the ghost ripple. And they started. They had not gone far before the water ghost showed signs of distress. "You walk too slowly," she said. "I am nearly frozen. My knees are so stiff now I can hardly move. I beseech you to accelerate your step." "I should like to oblige a lady," returned the master courteously, "but my clothes are rather heavy, and 100 yards an hour is about my speed. Indeed, I think we would better sit down here on the snowdrift and talk matters over." Do not do so, I beg," cried the ghost. "Let me move on. I feel myself growing rigid as it is. If we stop here, I shall be frozen stiff." "That, madam," said the master slowly, and seating himself on an ice cake, "that is why I have brought you here. We have been on this spot just 10 minutes. We have 50 more. Take your time about it, madam, but freeze. That is all I ask of you." "I cannot move my right leg now," cried the ghost in despair, "and my overskirt is a solid sheet of ice. Oh, good, kind Mr. Oglethorpe, light a fire and let me go free from these icy fetters." "Never, madam. It cannot be. I have you at last." "Alas!" cried the ghost, a tear trickling down her frozen cheek. "Help me, I beg. I congeal." "Congeal, madam, congeal," returned Oglethorpe coldly. "You have drenched me and mine for 203 years, madam. Tonight you have had your last drench." "Ah, but I shall thaw out again, and then you'll see. Instead of the comfortably tepid, genial ghost I have been in my past, sir, I shall be iced water," cried the lady threateningly. "No, you won't either," returned Oglethorpe. "For when you are frozen quite stiff, I shall send you to a cold storage warehouse, and there you shall remain an icy work of art for evermore." "But warehouses burn." "So they do. But this warehouse cannot burn. It is made of asbestos, and surrounding it are fireproof walls, and within those walls the temperature is now and shall forever be 416 degrees below the 0 point, low enough to make an icicle of any flame in this world, or the next," the master added with an ill-suppressed chuckle. "For the last time, I beseech you, I would go on my knees to you, Oglethorpe, were they not already frozen. I beg of you, do not do—" Here, even the words froze on the water ghost's lips, and the clock struck 1. There was a momentary tremor throughout the ice-bound form, and the moon, coming out from behind a cloud, shone down on the rigid figure of a beautiful woman sculptured in clear, transparent ice. There stood the ghost of Harrowby Hall, conquered by the cold, a prisoner for all time. The heir of Harrowby Hall had won at last, and today, in a large storage house in London, stands the frigid form of one who will never again flood the house of Oglethorpe with woe and sea-water. As for the heir of Harrowby, his success in coping with a ghost has made him famous, a fame that still lingers about him, although his victory took place some 20 years ago. And so, far from being unpopular with the fair sex, as he was when we first knew him, he has not only been married twice, but is to lead a third bride to the altar when the year is out. The end. Thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe our channel for more stories. Welcome to our channel. We hope you enjoy our narrated stories. Number 428. A panel, 5 feet by 2 feet 3 inches. Formerly the front of a cassone or coffer, intended to contain the garments and jewels of a bride. Subject: the triumph of love. Umbrian school of the 15th century. In the right-hand corner is a half-effaced inscription. Desidere something, de civitate lac something, me something, esset. This valuable painting is unfortunately much damaged by damp and mineral corrosives, owing probably to its having contained at one time Buried Treasure, bequeathed in 1878 by the widow of the Reverend Lawson Stone, late Fellow of Trinity College, Cambridge. Footnote: Catalogue of the Smith Museum, Leeds. By Ascension Day, Desiderio of Castiglione del Lago had finished the front panel of the wedding chest, which Messer Troilo Baglioni had ordered of Sir Piero Bontempi, whose shop was situated at the bottom of the steps of St. Maxentius, in that portion of the ancient city of Perugia, called by the Romans Augusta in recognition of its great glory, which takes its name from the Ivory Gate, built by Theodoric, king of the Goths. The said Desiderio had represented upon this panel the triumph of love, as described in his poem by Messer Francesco Petrarca of Arezzo. Certainly, with the exception of that Dante, who saw the vision of hell, purgatory, and paradise, the only poet of recent times who can be compared to those doctissimi viri, professors of life, P. Virgilius, Ovidius of Sulmona, and Statius. And the said Desiderio had betaken himself in this manner. He had divided the panel into 4 portions or regions, intended to represent the 4 phases of amorous passion. The first was a pleasant country, abundantly watered with twisting streams of great plenty and joyousness, in which were planted many hedges of fragrant roses, both red and blue, together with elms, poplars, and other pleasant and profitable trees. The second region was somewhat mountainous, but showing large store of lordly castles and thickets of pine and oak fit for hunting, which region, as being that of glorious love, was girt all round with groves of laurels. The third region, aspera ac dura region, harsh and hard region, was barren of all vegetation save huge thorns and ungrateful thistles, and in it, on rocks, was shown the pelican who tears his own entrails to feed his young, symbolical of the cruelty of love to true lovers. Finally, the fourth region was a melancholy cypress wood, among which roosted owls and ravens and other birds of ill omen, in order to display the fact that all earthly love leads to death. Each of these regions was surrounded by a wreath of myrtles, marvelously drawn, with great subtlety of invention, divided so as to meet the carved and gilded cornice, likewise composed of myrtles, which Sir Piero executed with singular skill with his own hand. In the middle of the panel, Desiderio had represented love, even as the poet has described, a naked youth, with wings of wondrous changing colors, enthroned upon a chariot, the axle and wheels of which were red gold, and covered with a cloth of gold of such subtle device that whole chariot seemed really to be on fire. On his back hung a bow, and a quiver full of dreadful arrows, and in his hands he held the reins of 4 snow-white coursers, trapped with gold, and breathing fire from their nostrils. Round his eyes was bound a kerchief fringed with gold, to show that love strikes blindly. And from his shoulders floated a scroll inscribed with the words, Sivus amor hominum deorumque delicia, savage love, the darling of men and gods. Round his car some before, some behind, some on horseback, some on foot, crowded those who have been famous for their love. Here you might see, on a bay horse with an eagle on his helmet, Julius Caesar, who loved Cleopatra, the Queen of Egypt. Sophonisba and Messalina in rich and strange Arabian garments. Orpheus seeking for Eurydice with his lute. Phaedra, who died for love of Hippolytus, her stepson. Mark Antony, Rinaldo of Montalbano, who loved the beautiful Angelica. Socrates, Tibullus, Virgilius, and other poets, with Messer Francesco Petrarca and Messer Giovanni Boccaccio. Tristram, who drank the love potion, riding on a sorrel horse, and near him Isotta, wearing a turban of cloth of gold, and these lovers of Rimini, and many more besides, the naming of whom would be too long, even as the poet has described. And in the region of happy love, among the laurels, he had painted his own likeness, red-haired, with a green hood falling on his shoulders. And this, because he was to wed, next St. John's Eve, Maddalena, the only daughter of his employer, Ser Piero. And among the unhappy lovers, he painted, at his request, Messer Troilo himself, for whom he was making this coffer. And Messer Troilo was depicted in the character of Troilus, the son of Priam, emperor of Troy. He was habited in armor, covered with a surcoat of white cloth of silver, embroidered with roses. By his side was his lance, and on his head a scarlet cap. Behind him were those who carried his falcon and led his hack, and men-at-arms with his banner, dressed in green and yellow, party-colored, with a scorpion embroidered on their doublet. And from his lance floated a pennon inscribed, Troilus sum servus amoris. I am Troilus, the slave of love. But Desiderio refused to paint among the procession Monna Maddalena, Piero's daughter, who was to be his wife, because he declared it was not fit that modest damsels should lend their face to other folk. And this he said because Ser Piero had begged him not to incense Messer Troilo, for in reality he had often portrayed Monna Maddalena, the which was marvelously lovely, though only, it is true, in the figure of Our Lady, the Mother of God. And the panel was ready by Ascension Day, and Ser Piero had prepared the box, and the carvings and gildings, griffins and chimeras, and acanthus leaves and myrtles, with the arms of Messer Troilo Baglioni, a most beautiful work. And Mastro Cavana, of the Gate of St. Peter, had made a lock and key of marvelous workmanship for the same coffer. And Messer Troilo would come frequently, riding over from his castle of Fratta, and see the work while it was progressing, and entertain himself lengthily at the shop, speaking with benignity and wisdom wonderful in one so young, for he was only 19, which pleased the heart of Ser Piero. But Desiderio did not relish, for which reason he was often gruff to Messer Troilo, and had many disputes with his future father-in-law. For Messer Troilo Baglione, called Barbacane, to distinguish him from another Troilo, his uncle, who was Bishop of Spello, although a bastard, had cast his eyes on Maddalena di Ser Piero Bontempi. He had seen the damsel for the first time on the occasion of the wedding festivities of his cousin, Grifone Baglioni, son of Ridolfo the Elder, with Deianira degli Orsini, on which occasion marvelous things were done in the city of Perugia, both by the magnificent house of Baglioni and the citizens, such as banquets, jousts, horse races, balls in the square near the cathedral, bullfights, allegories both Latin and vulgar, presented with great learning and sweetness, among which was the fable of Perseus, how he freed Andromeda, written by Master Gianozzo, belli rector venerabilis iste universitatis, and triumphal arches and other similar devices, in which Ser Piero Bontempi made many beautiful inventions, in company with Benedetto Bonfigli, Messer Fiorenzo di Lorenzo, and Piero de Castro Plebis, whom the holiness of our Lord Pope Sixtus IV afterwards summoned to work in his chapel in Rome. On this occasion, I repeat, Messer Troilo Baglioni of Fratta, who was unanimously declared to be the most beautiful and courteous youth, of singular learning and prowess, and well worthy of this magnificent Baglioni family, cast his eyes on Maddalena di Ser Piero, and sent her, through his squire, the knot of ribbons off the head of a ferocious bull, whom he had killed singulare vi act virtute, single-handedly, with merit. Nor did Messer Troilo neglect other opportunities of seeing the damsel, such as at church and at her father's shop, riding over from his castle at Fratta on purpose, but always honestis valde modibus, by extremely honorable methods, as the damsel showed herself very coy, and refused all presents which he sent her. Neither did Ser Piero prevent his honestly conversing with the damsel, fearing the anger of the magnificent family of Baglioni. But Desiderio de Città del Lago, the which was affianced to Monna Maddalena, often had words with Ser Piero on the subject, and one day well nigh broke the ribs of Messer Troilo's squire, whom he charged with carrying dishonest messages. Now it so happened that Messer Troilo, as he was the most beautiful, benign, and magnanimous of his magnificent family, was also the most cruel thereof, and incapable of brooking delay or obstacles. And being, as a most beautiful youth, he was only turned 19, and the first down had not come to his cheeks, and his skin was astonishingly white and fair, like a woman's, of a very amorous nature, of which many tales went concerning the violence he had done to damsels and citizens' wives of Gubbio and Spelo, and evil deeds in the castle of Fratta, in the Apennines, some of which it is more beautiful to pass in silence than to relate. Being, as I say, of an amorous nature, and greatly magnanimous and ferocious of spirit, Messer Troilo was determined to possess himself of this Maddalena di Ser Piero. So, a week after, having fetched away the wedding chest from Ser Piero's workshop, paying for it duly in Florentine lilies, he seized the opportunity of the festivities of St. John's Nativity, when it is the habit of the citizens to go to their gardens and vineyards to see how the country is prospering, and eat and drink in honest converse with their friends, in order to satisfy his cruel wishes. For it so happened that the said Ser Piero, who was rich and prosperous, possessing an orchard in the valley of the Tibet near San Giovanni, was entertaining his friends there, it being the eve of his daughter's wedding, peaceful and unarmed. And a serving wench, a Moor and a slave, who had been bribed by Messer Troilo, proposed to Monna Maddalena and the damsels of her company to refresh themselves, after picking flowers, playing with hoops, asking riddles and similar girlish games, by bathing in the Tiber, which flowed at the bottom of the orchard. To this, the innocent virgin, full of joyousness, consented. Hardly had the damsels descended into the riverbed, the river being low and easy to ford on account of the summer, when behold, there swept from the opposite bank a troop of horsemen, armed and masked, who seized the astonished Madalena and hurried off with her, vainly screaming like another Proserpina, to her companions who, surprised and ashamed at being seen with no garments, screamed in return, but in vain. The horsemen galloped off through Bastia, and disappeared long before Ser Piero and his friends could come to the rescue. Thus was Monna Maddalena cruelly taken from her father and bridegroom through the amorous passion of Messer Troilo. Ser Piero fell upon the ground fainting for grief, and remained for several days like one dead, and when he came to, he wept and cursed wickedly, and refused to take food and sleep, and to shave his beard. But being old and prudent, and the father of other children, he conquered his grief, well knowing that it was useless to oppose Providence or fight, being but a handicraftsman, with the magnificent family of Baglioni, lords of Perugia since many years, and as rich and powerful as they were magnanimous and implacable. So that when people began to say that, after all, Monna Maddalena might have fled willingly with a lover, and that there was no proof that the masked horseman came from Messer Troilo, although those of Bastia affirmed that they had seen the green and yellow colors of Fratta, and the said Troilo came not near the town for many months after, he never contradicted such words out of prudence and fear. But Desiderio of Castiglione del Lago, hearing these words, struck the old man on the mouth till he bled. And it came to pass, about a year after the disappearance of Monna Maddalena, and when, particularly as there had been a plague in the city, and many miracles had been performed by a holy nun of the convent of Sant'Anna, the which fasted 70 days, and Messer Ascanio Baglioni had raised a company of horse for the Florentine signori in their war against those of Siena, people had ceased to talk of the matter, that certain armed men, masked, but wearing the colors of Messer Troilo and a scorpion on their doublets, rode over from Fratta, bringing with them a coffer, wrapped in black baize, which they deposited overnight on Ser Piero Bontempi's doorstep. And Ser Piero, going at daybreak to his workshop, found that coffer, and recognizing it as the same which had been made, with a panel representing the triumph of love and many ingenious devices of sculpture and gilding, for Messer Troilo, called Barbacane, he trembled in all his limbs, and went and called Desiderio, and with him privily carried the chest into a secret chamber in his house, saying not a word to any creature. The key, a subtle piece of work of the smith Cavana, was hanging to the lock by a green silk string, onto which was tied a piece of parchment containing these words: To Master Desiderio, a wedding gift from Troilo Baglioni of Fratta. An allusion, doubtless, ferox atque cruenta facitia, by fierce and cruel joke, to the triumph of love, according to Messer Francesco Petrarca, painted upon the front of the coffer. The lid being raised, they came to a piece of red cloth, such as is used for mules. Etiam, even so, a fold of common linen, and below it a coverlet of green silk, which, being raised, their eyes were met. Heu infandum patri scleratumque donos. O unspeakable father of a wicked gift, by the body of Mona Maddalena, naked as God had made it, dead, with 2 stabs in the neck. The long golden hair tied with pearls, but dabbed in blood. The which Maddalena was cruelly squeezed into that coffer, having on her breast the body of an infant, recently born, dead like herself. When he beheld this sight, Piero threw himself on the floor and wept, and uttered dreadful blasphemies. But Desiderio of Castiglione del Lago said nothing, but called a brother of Ser Piero, a priest and prior of Saint Severus, and with his assistance carried the coffer into the garden. This garden, within the walls of the city on the side of Porta Eburnia, was pleasantly situated, and abounding with flowers and trees, useful both for their fruit and their shade, and rich likewise in all such herbs as thyme, majoram, fennel, and many others, that prudent housewives desire for their kitchen, all watered by stone canals, ingeniously constructed by Ser Piero, which were fed from a fountain where you might see a mermaid squeezing the water from her breasts, a subtle device of the same Piero, and executed in a way such as would have done honor to Phidias or Praxiteles, on hard stone from Montecatria. In this place, Desiderio of Castiglione del Lago dug a deep grave under an almond tree, the which grave he carefully lined with stones and slabs of marble, which he tore up from the pavement in order to diminish the damp, and then requested the priest, Ser Piero's brother, who had helped him in the work, to fetch his sacred vestments and hooks and all necessary for consecrating that ground. This the priest immediately did, being a holy man and sore grieved for the case of his niece. Meanwhile, with the help of Ser Piero, Desiderio tenderly lifted the body of Mona Maddalena out of the wedding chest, washed it in odorous waters, and dressed it in fine linen and bridal garments, not without much weeping over the poor damsel's sad plight, and curses upon the cruelty of her ravisher, and having embraced her tenderly, they laid her once more in the box, painted with the triumph of love, upon folds of fine damask and brocade, her hands folded, and her head decently placed upon a pillow of silver cloth, a wreath of roses, which Desiderio himself plaited, on her hair, so that she looked like a holy saint, or the damsel Julia, daughter of the Emperor Augustus Caesar, who was discovered buried on the Appian Way, and incontinently fell into dust. A marvelous thing. They filled the chest with as many flowers as they could find, also sweet-scented herbs, bay leaves, orris powder, frankincense, ambergris, and a certain gum called in Syrian physalis, and by the Jews parach, in which they say that the body of King David was kept intact from earthly corruption, and which the priest, the brother of Ser Piero, who was learned in all alchemy and astrology, had bought of certain Moors. Then With many alasses and tears, they covered the damsel's face with an embroidered veil and a fold of brocade, and, closing the chest, buried it in the hole, among great store of hay and straw and sand, and closed it up, and smoothed the earth, and to mark the place, Desiderio planted a tuft of fennel under the almond tree. But not before having embraced the damsel many times, and taken a handful of earth from her grave and eaten it, with many imprecations upon Messer Troilo, which it were terrible to relate. Then the priest, the brother of Ser Piero, said the service for the dead, Desiderio serving him as acolyte, and they all went their way, grieving sorely. But the body of the child, the which had been found in the wedding chest, they threw down a place near St. Herculanus, where the refuse and offal of dead animals are thrown, called the Sardinia, because it was the bastard of Ser Troilo, et infami sclerisque partum, and the child of wicked infamy. Then, as this matter got abroad, and also Desiderio's imprecations against Ser Troilo, Ser Piero, who was an old man and prudent, caused him to depart privily from Perugia, for fear of the wrath of the magnificent Orazio Baglioni, uncle of Messer Troilo, and lord of the town. Desiderio of Castiglione del Lago went to Rome, where he did wonderful things and beautiful, among others, certain frescoes in Saints Cosmas and Damian for the Cardinal of Ostia, and to Naples, where he entered the service of the Duke of Calabria, and followed his armies long, building fortresses and making machines and models for cannon and other ingenious and useful things. And thus for 7 years, until he heard that Ser Piero was dead at Perugia of a surfeit of eels, and that Messer Troilo was in the city raising a company of horse with his cousin Astore Baglioni for the Duke of Urbino. And this was before the plague and the terrible coming to Umbria of the Spaniards and renegade Moors under Caesar Borgia, Vicarius Sanctae Ecclesia, sue flagellum Dei et Novus Attila, the vicar of the Holy Church, or the whip of God, and the new Attila the Hun. So Desiderio came back privily to Perugia, and put up his mule at a small inn, having dyed his hair black and grown his beard after the manner of Easterns, saying he was Greek, coming from Ancona. And he went to the priest, prior of St. Severus, and the brother of Ser Piero, and discovered himself to him, who, although old, had great joy in seeing him and hearing of his intent. And Desiderio confessed all his sins to the priest, and obtained absolution, and received the body of Christ with great fervor and compunction. And the priest placed his sword on the altar, beside the gospel, as he said Mass, and blessed it. And Desiderio knelt and made a vow never to touch food save the body of Christ, till he could taste the blood of Messer Troilo. And for 3 days and 3 nights he watched him and dogged him, but Messer Troilo rarely went unaccompanied by his men, because he had offended so many honorable citizens by his amorous fury, and he knew that his kinsmen dreaded him and would gladly be rid of him on account of his ferocity and ambition, and their desire to unite the fief of Fratta to the other lands of the main line of the magnificent house of Baglioni, famous in arms. But one day, toward dusk, Desiderio saw Messer Troilo coming down a steep lane near St. Herculanus, alone, for he was going to a woman of light fame, called Flavia Bella, the which was very lovely. So Desiderio threw some ladders from a neighboring house which was being built, and sacks across the road, and hid under an arch that spanned the lane, which was greatly steep and narrow. And Messer Troilo came down on foot, whistling and paring his nails with a small pair of scissors. And he was dressed in grey silk hose, and a doublet of red cloth and gold brocade pleated about the skirts, and embroidered with seed pearl and laced with gold laces. And on his head he had a hat of scarlet cloth with many feathers, and his cloak and sword he carried under his left arm. And Messer Troilo was 26 years old, but seemed much younger, having no beard, and a face like Hyacinthus or Ganymede, whom Jove stole to be his cupbearer on account of his beauty. And he was tall and very ferocious and magnanimous of spirit, and as he went, going to Flavia the courtesan, he whistled. And when he came near the heaped-up ladders and the sacks, Desiderio sprang upon him and tried to run his sword through him. But although wounded, Messer Troilo grappled with him long. But he could not get at his sword, which was entangled in his cloak, and before he could free his hand and get at his dagger, Desiderio had him down, and ran his sword 3 times through his chest, exclaiming, "This is from Maddalena, in return for her wedding chest." And Messer Troilo, seeing the blood flowing out of his chest, knew he must die, and merely said, "Which Maddalena?" I remember. Old Piero's daughter. She was always a cursed, difficult slut, and died." And Desiderio stooped over his chest and lapped up the blood as it flowed, and it was the first food he tasted since taking the body of Christ, even as he had sworn. Then Desiderio went stealthily to the fountain under the arch of St. Praxedis, where the women wash linen in the daytime, and cleansed himself a little from that blood. Then he fetched his mule and hid it in some trees near Messer Piero's garden, and at night he opened the door, the priest having given him the key, and went in, and with a spade and mattock he had brought, dug up the wedding chest with the body of Mona Maddalena in it, the which, owing to the herbs and virtuous gums, had dried up and become much lighter. And he found the spot by looking for the fennel tuft under the almond tree, which was then in flower, it being spring. He loaded the chest, which was mouldy and decayed, on the mule, and drove the mule before him till he got to Castiglione del Lago, where he hid. And meeting certain horsemen, who asked him what he carried in that box, for they took him to be a thief, he answered, "His sweetheart." So they laughed and let him pass. Thus he got safely on to the territory of Arezzo, an ancient city of Tuscany, where he stopped. Now, when they found the body of Messer Troilo, there was much astonishment and wonder, and his kinsmen were greatly wroth. But Messer Orazio and Messer Ridolfo, his uncles, said, "'Tis as well, for indeed his courage and ferocity were too great, and he would have done some evil to us all, had he lived. But they ordered him a magnificent burial, and when he lay on the street dead, many folk, particularly painters, came to look at him for his great beauty, and the women pitied him on account of his youth, and certain scholars compared him to Mars, god of war, so great was his strength and ferocity, even in death. And he was carried to the grave by 8 men-at-arms, and 12 damsels and youths, dressed in white, walked behind, strewing flowers. And there was much splendor and lamentation on account of the great power of the magnificent house of Baglioni. As regards Desiderio of Castiglione del Lago, he remained at Arezzo till his death, preserving with him always the body of Monna Maddalena in the wedding chest, painted with the triumph of love, because he considered she had died odore magni sanctitatis. The end. Thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe our channel for more stories.
Welcome to our channel. We hope you enjoy our narrated stories. Anna knew the snake wanted to eat him, even if his mother said it only ate the cats and dogs scurrying over the trash pile. Anand held up one open hand, and then a single finger on the other, examining the years of his life in nicked and dirty scars. His family was Dale, the untouchables, only suited to garbage collection or cleaning toilets, as anything they touched turned to trash. He wanted to get to 2 full hands, and then he could join the men picking up the trash in town and not battle against the snake for its treasures. Slithering scales moved just under the surface. The trash shifted beneath his bare feet. Eyes wide, his body froze. A movement against his leg caused a lightning bolt of fear to erupt into a scream. "Anand, you fool!" The slap on the back of his head knocked him down into the trash pile. "Maya!" Anand cried. "I saw the snake. You spend too much time in dreams?" His mother's bright eyes glared at him under her green hijab. "Show me what you found." Lost in his battle against the snake, he hadn't even looked for treasures. One hand buried in the pile, pressed on something hard. He offered it up. The sun glinted off the tarnished metal cup, big in his tiny hand with a flat, thin handle. "I found this." He hoped it would be enough to make her happy. His mother snatched it, brought it to her eyes to squint at it. "Is it for a candle? Like a lamp?" Anne's eyes went wide. A lamp, maybe it is magic. He remembered the story his father told him of a magic lamp that gave out 3 wishes. He imagined himself a prince in shoes and a glittering gold suit, riding an elephant. He wished to be off this pile and safe from the snake. His mother's fingers, with better vision than her eyes, turned it around, found scratched letters on the thin handle. "Oh no, it's a measuring cup. At least it is metal. Go sell it to Badia." She threw it at his feet and left, off on her own search. Anand shivered at the name of the man who bought the treasures his family found. He had only ever gone with his brother to see him, never by himself, but that was before. The possibilities of a magic lamp vibrated in his head, erasing any fears. He could never let Badia have this wonder, and kneeled down to stare at it, scared to touch it. What should he wish for? Always hungry, his stomach clenched. Nayan, just the idea of the soft bread made his mouth water. He remembered the nayan and samosas they had from the cart vendor a few weeks ago. He didn't believe his brother Sona when he told him his plan. Careful of police, they found a street vendor who preferred to sip from his bottle of fini, then attend to his cart. Sona showed him how to touch the samosas, fingering each one, then to breathe on the nayan with big huffs. Anand had to get on his tiptoes to get over the side of the cart, just up for a minute until the shouts began. Then they ran. Anand flew, almost keeping up with Sona, diving between legs and carts. The dogs joined them for the game, running alongside with joyful barks. The police cursed and threw rocks, but Sona knew a hiding place through an alley that stunk worse than the trash pile. They waited until dark and the vendor carts left. Sona knew just where to look too, finding it in a garbage pile. Real food just thrown away. Kicking away the rats, they ate until their stomachs burst. Deep-fried samosas and pillowy, fresh naan, so much of it they brought more home for Maya. He wanted to eat like that again. He closed his eyes and wished for naan and samosas, but nothing happened. And tried to remember Father's story. He had to rub it, yes, that was what made the genie come out. The story reminded him of his father's warm hands and leaning against his thin body. His father was the strongest person Anand knew until the day he started coughing, struggling to even breathe with the sickness. Then his body became still, only the rumbling breath proving he was alive. Finally, the light left his eyes, gone to be reborn in a better life. Anand held his magic lamp in one hand while he wiped his damp face. He should not be so selfish. He should make a wish for someone else. Sona, his older brother and best friend, now had the same disease as their father, slowly wasting away. All night he coughed, making Maya cry and forget she had another son. If Sona was better. Anand rubbed the metal lamp with his hand, his thoughts on his brother, wishing he was healthy. A small plastic bottle appeared in the magic lamp, yellow with a white cap. Anand's mouth dropped open. He picked it up to feel its physical existence. Examining it closely, he saw writing on the side, a magical code holding secrets he wished he understood. He tried to open the top, but it just spun. He prodded, twisted, and pushed until finally the bottle opened. Many white little balls rolled inside. How does this help? He put his nose in and found a sugary smell. He tried one, frowning at the gritty, sour taste. He swallowed it quickly, but his stomach only growled. The magic bottle must be a sign that Sona was better. Anand leapt up to run to his home, and the multicolored cloth stretched between the bent poles. "Sona, are you cured?" Anand needed only a glance to see he was no better. On the ground, pale and gaunt, Anand stood and stared at his still form, the heavy rumbling breath. He pushed on Sona's shoulder until he saw his wet eyes, showed him the magic bottle, and then left the tent. What else? He should wish for money, to make his mother happy. He closed his eyes and wished for rupees, for the air to be as thick and full of the yellow, blue, and green paper as a monsoon pouring down on him, and the trash pile turned to a hill of gold and silver coins. Anand rubbed hard, using his full palm. This time a small plastic card appeared in the small metal lamp, with raised numbers and words. Anand picked it up and turned it around. Not rupees, not gold, just a piece of plastic, a black strip on the back. He gritted his teeth. The trash pile was full of plastic. He couldn't even sell this to Badiya. He might as well sell the lamp. It obviously didn't work. Maya had more things to sell to Badiya, and Anand walked slow through the narrow street, dragging his fear along with the weight of the bag. Badiya had black, narrow eyes and a huge nose. His tongue licked his teeth as Anand approached, keeping a safe distance. "Is this all you have, boy?" Badiya picked through the Anand's bag of treasures, each dark finger ending in a sharp claw. "I have one more thing of metal. A small lamp." Anand's eyes were glued to the talons. "Show me." Badiya growled. "I thought it was a magic lamp, but it doesn't work," and then stepped closer to show the man. Badiya sneered, his black eyes glancing at the small object before going Anand, moving up and down. "It is only a cup for measuring rice or flour." Badiya snatched Anand's arm in a vice grip and held him tight. "I do have need of a boy, though, one with a pretty face." A single claw caressed Anand's cheek. "I have a very important buyer who would like you very much." Badiya bared his teeth. Anand knew of boys who went with Badiya, like his cousin PK, who left and never came back. and unclosed his eyes and rubbed the magic lamp, his fingers desperate. He had one last wish. Anand felt the power course through his body, changing him. He leapt toward Bedia to touch him, his fangs tasting Bedia's neck. He twisted and coiled around him, squeezing the light from him, before he released to slither down onto the side of the road. In a wide grin, his tongue flicked in and out, tasting the air and freedom. The end. Thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe our channel for more stories. Welcome to our channel. We hope you enjoy our narrated stories. One thing I was very wary about was the temperamental moods of nature. Before leaving the nest for the first time, my mom had instructed me on flying head-on into a steady stream of wind. One flick of a wing against it, and I would be tumbled beak over toes. Better to use the gales to your advantage to conserve energy. A slight breeze will allow the airfoil of your wings to allow you to soar. Backdrafts allow you to hover in place. I had been excited to try, to make her proud and master the art of soaring and hovering and attacking those pesky starlings that so annoyed us. I had been restless and overly eager to soar like my siblings, and now I pay for foolishness with every rising sun. Our nest was in the crook of branches in a tall sugar pine tree. From it we could see the entire human village that stretched from the shore of the sea to the forest before the gently rolling green foothills of the Cascade Mountains. The purple sky to the west was darkening like a festering bruise, the slate-blue cloud cover thickening. Good. It would be a very dark night. I trembled with impatience and the yearn to feel safe again. Down below, windows brightened as lamps were lit. The intoxicating smells of meats and fish, broiling and stewing that wafted upwards made my beak water. Human food was so much tastier than forest offerings and carrion. The homes to the eastern side of town were bigger and brighter, with large yards groomed neat and tidy with flowering shrubbery, gazebos, and big tasseled umbrellas. The east side refuse bins were brimming with tasty scraps. The homes surrounding my tree were much smaller, with dirt yards planted with vegetable gardens and refuse bins devoid of anything remotely edible. At last, the ebony night had descended around me like the blackness of my mum's wings, a distant memory now, but a soothing one, my happy place. I leapt from the branch and listed to the left as usual, correcting my handicap with my extra strong right wing. As the girl sat by her window, she looked at her drawing for a few seconds, then added more black. There, she thought, he's much more evil now. She growled in her throat like an irritated tomcat when she heard footsteps approaching her door. She swiftly put her drawing in the drawer under the desk and picked up her pink pastel crayon to color in some petals on a page with roses in a sunlit garden, complete with yellow butterflies. "Gar," she said softly as the door opened. She always came in without knocking. "Matilda, dear," her mother said with a nervous twitch at the corners of her mouth, "look who's come to visit." Maddie did not look up. She knew who the visitor was, and she hated him. "Hello, Matilda." The priest's holier-than-thou voice grated on her nerves. It took all her willpower not to bunch her shoulders. "Can you look at me, child?" "No, go away." "She's been like this for 3 days now," her mother said. Father Fairweather said, "That's a very pretty picture, Matilda. You're a very good little artist." She willed herself not to flinch. "I knew you'd like it. And I hate when you call me that. Matilda, dear, can't you look up? Father Fairweather has complimented you." Her mother's shadow fell over her as she leaned over to look at the colorful garden. Then she reached out tentatively and took her daughter's hand and turned it towards her. Maddie felt her mother's chagrin, thick and wonderfully prickly. She pictured her mother's face just then, lips a tight line and eyes blazing under an angry furrowed brow. Maddie's small white hand was coated in black charcoal. Father Fairweather said, "I've brought you a gift, Matilda." Curiosity prevented her from growling again. The tall gray man in black placed a brand new package of pastels on the desk. Maddie couldn't wait to open the package and inhale the waxy, oily smell deeply. The smell was a lot like the kerosene in her lamp. She remained frozen. She always tested herself this way to see how long she could appear comatose, for she was getting very good at it. Father Fairweather turned to leave. His shadow slumped. "I've won." Just before turning to leave as well, her mother snatched up the pastels and opened the small flat box. She closed it and put it back down, then followed the priest out the door. After their footsteps had receded down the stairs, Maddie silently got up and went to the top of the stairs, where she could hear them talking quietly in the living room. After all the years spent in her shell, she developed the hearing of a cat. "Well, at least she's not hurting herself anymore," the priest said. "She seems calm, and the drawings have improved. No more spooky ones." "No," her mother lied. "No more screaming at midnight." "No, well now. We could wait a little longer. Perhaps she'll continue on this positive path." "I suppose. But, can't we try the ritual again?" "No. I'll run away before that again." "Oh, now, Mary." Silence for a minute. Then the priest said, "Well, let me confer with Cardinal Iscariot. I'll be making the monthly passage to Astoria to present our tithe. He's discovered possible possession in 2 recent additions to the orphanage there." No. Maddie stepped on the floorboards nearest the hallway wall, where they creaked hardly at all. In her room, she closed the door, wishing it had a lock. She sat down at her desk and smiled as she picked up the box of pastels and opened the lid. The black one was missing. She wasn't surprised, but she did feel a loathing curl inside her chest, like the larva of a scream ready to burst forth. "Never mind," she thought. "I prefer my charcoals anyways." She brushed the garden to the floor and took the dark one from the drawer. The figure was crooked like an old oak tree, with tattered black rags draped on its limbs. The head was half the size of it, with a gaping maw full of square white teeth. It had holes for eyes under a shadowy hood. They were terrible eyes, she knew. She'd seen them, yellow like candle wax and hypnotic like a cobra's eyes. Her room was small, a bed with a wooden chest before it, a desk by the window, and an armoire. At the base of the armoire, she'd pried a loose board up and inside the small rectangular space. She stashed the things her mother would not understand and take from her. She pulled out a pastel crayon box and opened it. Inside were an assortment of charcoal sticks she'd made herself in varying thicknesses and lengths. She chose a thin one, 4 inches long, and put the rest back. At her desk, she finished drawing the creature's bony, slender hands, the fingers long as brand-new pencils. She shaded them in gray tones by mixing amounts of charcoal with a stub of white pastel. She drew from memory she once thought fictional but now believed to be real. From downstairs, the sound of a broken bottle. "Good. Sleep well, bitch, mother." At last, she looked up from her latest drawing of Bernard, son of a Wendigo and a Canadian native witch named Coco. So Bernard had said. She sat back sleepily and content. It seemed the more she illustrated Bernard, the less he appeared in her dreams, as if he were content to be pictured, immortalized, even admired. She could believe that one such as he were that big-headed to think that. She felt the night pressing at the window. She loved the dark. It calmed her like her charcoal pencils did, and the kerosene scent of her pastels. She felt a draft from the small crack in the sill and turned towards the pane. Her smile flashed away from her face like a bonfire ember in a gust. Her eyes grew round and filled half her face. She stifled a scream, lest her mother fear her possessed again. She'd forgotten she was passed out cold. At the window was a raven peering in at her, its onyx eyes searching hers. I had frightened the girl. I'd come to this house on many nights after learning to fly, in my frustratingly lopsided way. The outside bins were rich with delectable human food scraps. Sometimes chicken legs with only a small bite taken, sometimes sliced beets with melted goat cheese, sometimes lamb bones, the fat untouched. On this night, I know not why, I was beckoned to the window on the top floor overlooking the yard. I was drawn to it. Perhaps when I flew, sideways at first until corrected, and alight upon a branch close to it, I'd seen a small, pale face staring out into the night. She was smiling. I could see she loved the night as much as I. Ravens are not creatures of the night by trade. They roost at night, like most birds do. I was not like most ravens. Ever since that fateful day of my first flight from my nest, I thought I was as strong as my siblings and as strong as my mum wished me to be. But when I leapt from the nest the first time, my right wing obeyed. My left was not so much. The breeze that should have caught my airfoil instead tumbled me beak to toes, and I fell. On the ground I cried for my mum, but she shook her head, ashamed, and turned her back to me. I knew what happened to runts and the infirmed amongst our kind. My uncle had been born with a club foot. He could fly, but was ever pursued by his own kin until at last they'd attacked en masse and pecked out his eyes and shat on his back, leaving him to die alone and blind and dirty. I was not about to suffer his fate. I hid myself in the daylight. In the night, I became part of it. Perhaps because of my handicap, my night vision grew. As I looked into the window, I could see the girl was terrified. What? Of me? I didn't understand, but I felt bad. She was also a creature of the night. I could see it in her expression as she looked out and up into the skies. I crouched in supplication and tried to look into her eyes so I could read her, and perhaps she could read me. Maddie suppressed the screaming she felt like that snake was now eager to be free. No, she thought. The Cardinal Iscariot would tie her down again, and the torture would be worse than before. Bernard was big and huge and wanting her to come with him. A raven! At my window. She'd seen it peering at her, cocking its head to try and catch her eye. Bernard, in raven form. It has to be. Maddie knew most birds roost at night. It was as odd to see a bird at night as it was to see a raccoon in the daylight. Bernard, that evil demon. In bird form, she thought again and shivered. Maybe she should let the Cardinal torture her to death. Life was just so. Tap, tap. It was back, but she wouldn't let it in. From the time she was an infant, she hated to be touched. The touch of a hand brought shards of electric pain to her new pink skin. She'd hoped it would fade, but it did not. To be enveloped into arms was to be thrown into the sky as a sacrifice. Lightning bolts searing and sizzling until she felt too exhausted to speak or move. Eventually, people stopped touching her. If she ignored them, they turned away and she was at peace. One day, her mother had brought the priest. He'd tied her down and said a bunch of bullshit words, and Bernard had come to her rescue, whispering to her, "Just lie still. Smile. No more screaming. Just worship me, and someday I'll come and take you from all this pain." She had done as he said, and she dreamt of him, and drew pictures of him in homage. It had been enough until now. Here he was in raven form. What did he want? She came back to the window as I tapped again. She breathed heavily and looked into my eyes, looking for something, searching. She opened the window, and I crouched low to make myself smaller, meeker. I looked up at her, feigning weakness and not sure why I was here or why so drawn to her. She said, "Bernard, it's okay. I'm ready to go. Take me away." I thought, Bernard, and hopped into her room. I understood then that she feared something I was not. I made my decision. If she were to wring my neck, so be it. But I truly believed I'd at last found a kindred spirit. I hopped to her desk and crouched low, turning my head away because she seemed afraid to look into my eyes. I closed my eyes. I prepared for execution or eye gouging as my siblings had tried so long ago. I felt a gentle touch on my feathers. The ones on my neck, and I cooed like a dove and bowed even lower, purring like a kitten. It was heaven to feel love through a hand, a touch I'd never felt before. The huge black bird in Maddie's hands curled up and nestled close to her. "Oh, my goodness," she said quietly. "You're not evil at all. You've been sent to me to protect me from Bernard." The end. Thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe our channel for more stories. Welcome to our channel. We hope you enjoy our narrated stories. Mark drives down the foggy dirt road in his black Jeep. The dirt under his tires shoots up from beneath them as they try to cling to the ground. He can barely see a few feet in front of him. A stream ran off the side of him, following the side of the road. The headlights are the only light in the road. No city lights reach all the way out here in the middle of nowhere. He is driving to his aunt's house in the middle of the Gunnison National Forest in Colorado. She sounded spooked when she called him, but the line broke up before she could say what the problem was, and Mark rushed out of his house with only a single bottle of water. That was 2 hours ago. If only she didn't live in an inholding in the middle of a national forest. He'd be lucky to find her house, even though he has been there multiple times. He checks his gas and notices it is close to empty. Damn, he was in too much of a rush and could barely think about anything. He just knew his aunt wasn't okay, and all he could think about was getting out there to help her. He already lost his mom, and his dad hasn't spoken to him for years because Mark didn't believe in God. The blood flow slows a little just as his eyes close and everything goes dark. Like there could be any ghosts or anything like that. "What you see is what we get, Dad." He hopes the gas will hold up until he can find her place. It is already 11 at night, and he barely got any sleep last night because of his stupid neighbors, screaming at Call of Duty all night. He pounded on their door, but they couldn't hear him. The headphones were probably noise-canceling. He rubs his eyes and blinks them a few times in an attempt to stay awake. He hasn't seen a single car for at least the past hour, just his own headlights in the road in front of him. Where was he? He hasn't seen that broken down shed the last time he came up here, albeit it has been a while. The road continues to get more and more broken down. Grass starts to seep into it, making it one with nature. The dirt is mixed with a sandy substance now as well. Mark shoots his head to his right as something glows out of the corner of his eye. He strains his eyes to see what it was, but nothing is there. The only thing he can see past the darkness is the first line of tall trees. He shakes his head and continues driving down the road. He expects, hopes. Any minutes he will turn a corner and pull into his aunt's property, but something in the pit of his stomach tells him he took the wrong turn a long ways back. And ever since he suspected this, he has tried to get a map on his phone, but the service is terrible out here. He remembers his father's words like he had just said them yesterday. God will show you the way. Follow his light and you will come out on top. Yeah, well, if he would show me the way, I wouldn't even be in this mess in the first place. He would have just let me go to bed in peace. With a thud and a last gasp, his car comes slowly to a halt. Mark hits the steering wheel and grabs his phone and turns on the flashlight. The gas tank is empty. He opens the door and steps out into the cold night. A chill runs down his spine, planting him in that spot, cementing him to the floor. He brings his arms together for a hug to make himself warm, and then he looks out into the forest and spots another glow for a split second before it disappears again. A cougar. A bear. Mark moves again and pushes towards the back of his car for the gas tank he always keeps in it. He aims the flashlight in the trunk of the car through the window and sees nothing. Confused, he opens the trunk and the lights turn on. Nothing is back there. Just what I needed. He kicks the car's tire and immediately regrets it when he gets a big throb of pain. Damn it. He checks around himself once again as the needles on his neck shoot out. He can feel a presence watching him. It has to be some sort of animal. Hopefully, it isn't hungry. Mark walks back to the front of the car as a breeze picks up, sending his t-shirt to flap in the wind against his belly. "Where the hell is your house, Auntie?" He screams into the night, hoping someone would hear him, or at least scare off the predators in the dark. Who was he kidding? Nobody is crazy enough to live out here in the middle of nowhere, except his God-loving family, who think God will save them on a whim. Suddenly, a dark shadow flies past Mark's head, scaring him, as he falls backwards and trips on a stone. His elbow smashes the window to the front driver's seat. Glass falls all over the seat, and blood streams from Mark's arm. The blood falls onto the seat and dirt ground when he pulls it back out. He grits his teeth and holds his arm, trying to stop the blood flow, but it won't stop. His breathing is faster as his heart beats in his chest. The blood pushes out from his arm in time with his heart. Does that mean it's an artery? Mark's vision fades in and out. He falls to his knees as the world around him starts to turn upside down. He pulls his shirt off, fumbling with his shaky hands, and rips it, creating a rag, and ties it around his arm where the wound is. The blood flow slows a little just as his eyes close and everything goes dark. Darker than a forest in the middle of nowhere with no light pollution. Darker than the devil's soul. Darker than the dirt he sits on, hoping he did enough. Mark shoots away because something in the darkness scurries off into the forest, shooting dirt up at his face as it runs. Mark, still dizzy, feels his arm. Pain shoots throughout it as he feels the blood-soaked shirt. This won't last. He pulls himself up by grabbing onto the door handle and looks around. It is still dark out and even colder now, as he can feel the chill creep deep inside his bones. The pinpricks in his skin tell him hypothermia can set in, especially because of this fog making him slightly wet. He grabs the other part of his shirt and wraps it over the first rag. Mark then searches for his phone on the ground and finally finds it tucked underneath the tire. He tries to call 911, but once again it says, "No service." Aren't these damn things supposed to work anywhere? Mark almost throws the phone off into the trees, but then decides against it and turns on the flashlight on the phone. The feeling of terror comes back to him, but just for a moment as he looks into the trees surrounding him. He has to go find help, maybe even stumble upon his aunt's house. She can't be too far away. He knows she's out here somewhere. Mark picks a direction that seems most likely to be where his aunt would be in, and walks into the forest, through shrubs, tall grass, branches, and a trail of blood following him. Hopefully the animal is gone, or else he will be a nice early morning breakfast for whatever was following him earlier. Just one step after another. He is so weak and thirsty and frozen. It was stupid to not bring anything with him, but his aunt sounded scared. He just wanted to help her. She is the one person who hasn't abandoned him. She believes he will be saved by God and he will forgive Mark. But Mark doesn't care. He just cares that she still loves him, and he knows he has to find her and help her, bloody arm or not. Mark steps on a rock and loses his balance, falling to the ground. He lands on his good arm and picks himself back up. He notices his mouth is dry. He hasn't had anything to drink since he left. He walks forward again, but sees that whatever he tripped on isn't a rock. It's hard to make out in the dark, but as soon as his phone light shines on the object, he jumps backwards, almost falling over once again. He looks around for an explanation or the person responsible. There is no skin. It is just bone. So why would they be around here anymore? They are long gone, right? Mark stares at the skull of what used to be a human. It sticks out of the dirt, half embedded in it. Mark notices what is around him. A clearing juts out ahead, mostly of rock and dirt. A few heavy machinery and other equipment lie around on the ground. The fog is only deeper now, making it hard to see what is what. Just then, Mark notices a movement come from the side of one bulldozer in the clearing, and then moves behind it. It was a man that looked as if he was glowing, almost as if he was glowing from inside himself. "Hey, sir, I'm lost. I could use some help." Mark runs over towards the truck as the ground turns more wet, making Mark slip and slide on the mud. "Please, I need some water." Mark turns the corner behind the bulldozer, but nobody is there. He looks around, confused. Where could the man have gone? Behind the bulldozer is a big clearing, and to the left is a small mountainside. Jackets lay on the floor, and lunchboxes are sprawled all over the place. Half-eaten sandwiches with mold growing on them sit inside. A chainsaw lies on a large rock, and next to it is an upside-down construction helmet. Bloodstains coat the helmet red. Chunks pooled and dried in the inside of it. What the hell? Mark swallows his fear and continues his search for safety. It is like this place was suddenly evacuated. Like everybody here just up and vanished. Chills run down Mark's spine, making his arms shoot out with pain. This place feels off, like someone is watching him. Like something dark happened here, and if he doesn't leave, it will happen to him as well. But that is stupid to think. What could possibly happen to him that is worse than bleeding out in the middle of a dark forest with no way to call for help? Nothing bad happened here. They probably just cut themselves on something and the blood pooled in the helmet and they all left because the job was called off. Right? No. Then why leave all the equipment? Maybe for a night, but it feels like it's been a lot longer than that. The feeling of being watched comes back over him as he searches through the bulldozer's windows. He spots a bottle of water. He looks around him back to the forest surrounding the clearing and then opens the door to the bulldozer and steps inside. He grabs the half-empty water and chugs it, not caring if it's infected with disease. His dry throat fills with the water, but the cracks and desert-like feelings stay. It didn't help. He needs to find his aunt. Suddenly, his heart beats fast and a pure feeling of adrenaline and fear rolls through his body much more intensely than before. He hears sounds coming from far off in the distance in the woods somewhere. People are out there. They could help him. Just as he tries to leave the truck, the door slams shut in front of him. He tries to open it, but it won't budge. He looks all around him through the windows as the screams of people get even louder and more focused. It is like they are right in front of him now. Screaming, crying. He hears lots of footsteps running on the forest floor. Mark looks around, but everything is still completely dark. Darker even than when he was outside as the light from his phone glares so he can only see himself through the window. His heart beats faster as he fumbles with his phone, trying to turn off the light. This isn't funny. Someone better let me out of here. Mark's chest feels as if it will explode. His bandaged arm starts to bleed all over the inside of the bulldozer. He has to calm down or else he will bleed out in here, but he can't. His breathing is rapid, like he just ran 10 miles. His head is on fire, every neuron firing. Finally, his shaky hands turn off the light. Outside stand these white figures in mining clothes from a long time ago. They are covered in dust and dirt. The screaming is even louder now as Mark tries to cover his ears, but it only makes it louder. His head feels like it is going to explode. An army of white, almost see-through. People surround the bulldozer. "Who are you?" Mark screams. They just stare at Mark with frowns. Mark just then notices some of them have missing arms. Some have parts of their face missing, chunks just gone. This has to be a joke, right? He searches the cabin of the truck for a secret screen or camera when all the ghosts take one step forward towards Mark at the same time. The screaming and crying persists. Mark's heart has never beat faster as his vision goes in and out. Save us. Our land. Let us rest in peace. A hand appears on the side of the truck's window, making Mark jump out of the seat and move away from it. Mark looks around him in a circle, back and forth from each ghost to the next. He doesn't know what to do. He can feel the fear in chest, his imminent death. The screaming, the crying, the pain. Mark starts to recite the Hail Mary as best as he can remember it. Suddenly, a loud explosion sounds out, and he hides down below the windows as a bright flash lights up the outside. The truck shakes. He can't see anything for a few seconds, and then it is dark again. Everything is quiet. No sounds. No movement. The fear has been released. Mark looks up and over the console of the truck and sees nothing but the clearing of mud and dirt. He can hear the insects chirp away through the truck. The night sky is clear and vibrant with stars. Mark grabs his shoulder and, without thought, opens the door to the bulldozer and jumps out. He is still shaking. What just happened to him? A light turns on above the small mountaintop, and he can slightly see an older woman standing on the porch of a house. He smiles, "Auntie." When he reaches the top of the mountainside, he is still shaking and his arm hurts like hell. But he made it. "Mark, what happened? Come inside." His aunt grabs him and helps him inside her small cabin. He sits in a living room with shelves of pictures of family. Books line one of the walls, one of them being the Bible. A fire is going, lighting up the room, a nice, glowing orange. Mark's aunt hands him a glass of tea and puts a blanket over his back. He just stares ahead at the wall, not blinking. "I called an ambulance. They are on their way." "Mark doesn't move, Mark." Mark looks towards her at the floor. There were so many of them. I could see through their bodies, young men, older men, missing limbs. I could barely breathe. It was so loud. "What do you mean?" "What happened?" His aunt sits down next to him on the sofa and puts an arm around him. "Is this about the site they are digging up?" "I told them not to. They are not letting the dead rest in peace." His aunt smiles. He just stares ahead at the wall. "A long time ago there was a mining accident down there. Plenty of people died in a large explosion." Mark shudders in fear. "Are you okay?" "I believe, Auntie." I believe in God." Mark puts down his tea on the table in front of him and suddenly looks worried. "Why did you call me earlier?" "Is everything all right?" His aunt looks at him, confused, and then shines with a smile. "Oh, yes. I just wanted to share an amazing cookie recipe I found." Mark looks at her with a blank stare and then smiles and laughs. "I came all the way through that, just for cookies." They both laugh and hug each other as the ghosts watch from the canyon below, knowing that Mark will help them find peace. He did. The end. Thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe our channel for more stories.
Welcome to our channel. We hope you enjoy our narrated stories. I took a large room, far up Broadway, in a huge old building whose upper stories had been wholly unoccupied for years until I came. The place had long been given up to dust and cobwebs, to solitude and silence. I seemed groping among the tombs and invading the privacy of the dead. That first night I climbed up to my quarters. For the first time in my life, a superstitious dread came over me, and as I turned a dark angle of the stairway, and an invisible cobweb swung its lazy woof in my face and clung there, I shuddered as one who had encountered a phantom. I was glad enough when I reached my room and locked out the mold and darkness. A cheery fire was burning in the grate, and I sat down before it with a comforting sense of relief. For 2 hours I sat there thinking of bygone times, recalling old scenes and summoning half-forgotten faces out of the mists of the past. Listening, in fancy, to voices that long ago grew silent for all time, and to once familiar songs that nobody sings now. And as my reverie softened down to a sadder and sadder pathos, the shrieking of the winds that sighed softened to a wail. The angry beating of the rain against the panes diminished to a tranquil patter, and one by one the noises in the street subsided until the hurrying footsteps of the last belated straggler died away in the distance and left no sound behind. The fire had burned low. A sense of loneliness crept over me. I arose and undressed, moving on tiptoe about the room, doing stealthily what I had to do, as if I were environed by sleeping enemies whose slumbers it would be fatal to break. I covered up in bed and lay listening to the rain and wind and the faint creak of distant shutters till they lulled me to sleep. I slept profoundly, but how long I do not know. All at once I found myself awake, and filled with a shuddering expectancy. All was still. All but my own heart. I could hear it beat. Presently, the bedclothes began to slip away slowly towards the foot of the bed, as if someone were pulling them. I could not stir, I could not speak. Still, the blanket slipped deliberately away till my breast was uncovered. Then, with great effort, I seized them and drew them over my head. I waited, listened, waited. Once more that steady pull began, and once more I lay torpid, a century of dragging seconds till my breast was naked again. At last I roused my energies and snatched the covers back to their place and held them with a strong grip. I waited. By and by I felt a faint tug and took a fresh grip. The tug strengthened to a steady strain. It grew stronger and stronger. My hold parted, and for the third time the blanket slid away. I groaned. An answering groan came from the foot of the bed. Beaded drops of sweat stood upon my forehead. I was more dead than alive. Presently I heard a heavy footstep in my room, and then a comforting laugh relaxed my lips, and I was happy again. I got up and struck a light. When I found the locks and bolts were just as I had left them, another soothing laugh welled in my heart and rippled from my lips. I took my pipe and lit it, and was just sitting down before the fire when down went the pipe out of my nerveless fingers. The blood forsook my cheeks, and my placid breathing was cut short with a gasp. In the ashes on the hearth, side by side with my own bare footprint, was another, so vast that in comparison mine was but an infant's. That I had had a visitor. The elephant tread was explained. I put out the light and returned to bed, palsied with fear. I lay a long time, peering into the darkness and listening. Then I heard a grating noise overhead, like the dragging of a heavy body across the floor. Then the throwing down of the body, and the shaking of my windows in response to the concussion. In distant parts of the building I heard the muffled slamming of doors. I heard at intervals stealthy footsteps creeping in and out among the corridors and up and down the stairs. Sometimes these noises approached my door, hesitated, and went away again. I heard the clanking of chains faintly in remote passages, and listened while the clanking grew nearer, while it wearily climbed the stairways, marking each move by the loose surplus of chain that fell with an accented rattle upon each succeeding step as the goblin that bore it advanced. I heard muttered sentences, half-uttered screams that seemed smothered violently, and the swish of invisible garments and the rush of invisible wings. Then I became conscious that my chamber was invaded, that I was not alone. I heard sighs and breathing about my bed, and mysterious whisperings. 3 little spheres of phosphorescent light appeared on the ceiling directly over my head, clung and glowed there for a moment, and then dropped. 2 of them upon my face and 1 upon the pillow. They spattered liquidly and felt warm. Intuition told me that they had turned to gouts of blood as they fell, and needed no light to satisfy myself of that. Then I saw pallid faces, dimly luminous, and white uplifted hands floating bodiless in the air, floating a moment and then disappearing. The whispering ceased, and the voices and the sounds, and a solemn stillness followed. I waited and listened. I felt that I must have light or die. I was weak with fear. I slowly raised myself toward a sitting posture, and my face came in contact with a clammy hand. All strength went from me apparently, and I fell back like a stricken invalid. Then I heard the rustle of a garment. It seemed to pass to the door and go out. When everything was still once more, I crept out of bed, sick and feeble, and lit the gas with a hand that trembled as if it were aged with 100 years. The light brought out some little cheer to my spirits. I sat down and fell into a dreamy contemplation of that great footprint in the ashes. By and by its outlines began to waver and grow dim. I glanced up, and the broad gas flame was slowly wilting away. In the same moment I heard that elephantine tread again. I noted its approach nearer and nearer along the musty halls, and dimmer the light waned. The tread reached my very door and paused. The light had dwindled to a sickly blue, and all things about me were in a spectral twilight. The door did not open, and yet I felt a faint gust of air fan my cheek and presently was conscious of a huge cloudy presence before me. I watched it with fascinated eyes. A pale glow stole over the thing. Gradually, its cloudy folds took shape. An arm appeared, then legs, then a body, and at last a great sad face looked out of the vapor. Stripped of its filmy housings, naked, muscular and comely, the majestic Cardiff giant loomed above me. All my misery vanished, for a child might know that no harm could come with that benignant countenance. My cheerful spirits returned at once, and in sympathy with them the gas turned up brightly again. Never a lone outcast was so glad to welcome company as I was to greet the friendly giant. I said, "Why is it nobody but you? Do you know I have been scared to death for the last 2 or 3 hours? I am most honestly glad to see you. I wish I had a chair. Here, don't try to sit down in that thing." But it was too late. He was in before I could stop him, and down he went. I never saw a chair slivered so in my life. Stop, you'll ruin it." Too late. There was another crash, and another chair was resolved into its original elements. Confound it! Do you want to ruin all the furniture on the place? Here, you petrified fool. But it was no use. Before I could arrest him, he sat down on the bed, and it was a melancholy ruin. Now what sort of way is that to do? First you come lumbering about the place, bringing a legion of vagabond goblins along with you to worry me to death, and then, when I overlook an indelicacy of costume, which would not be tolerated anywhere by cultivated people except in a respectable theater, and not even there if the nudity were of your sex, you repay me by wrecking all the furniture you can find to sit down on. And why will you? You damage yourself as much as you do me. You have broken off the end of your spinal column, and littered up the floor with the chips of your hands till the place looks like a marble yard. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. You are big enough to know better. Well, I will not break any more furniture, but what am I to do? I had not a chance to sit down for a century. And the tears came into his eyes. Poor devil, I said. I should not have been so harsh with you. And you were an orphan too, no doubt. But sit down on the floor here. Nothing else can stand your weight, and, besides, we cannot be sociable with you, away up there above me. I want you down where I can perch on this high counting-house stool and gossip with you face to face. So he sat down on the floor and lit a pipe which I gave him, threw one of my red blankets over his shoulders, inverted my sitz-bath on his head, helmet fashion, and made himself picturesque and comfortable. Then he crossed his ankles while I renewed the fire, and exposed the flat, honeycomb bottoms of his prodigious feet to the grateful warmth. What is the matter with the bottom of your feet and the back of your legs, that they are gouged up so? Infernal chilblains, I caught them clear up to the back of my head, roosting out there under the Newells farm. But I love this place. I love it as one loves his old home. There is no peace for me like the peace I feel when I am there. We talked along for an hour, and then I noticed that he looked tired, and I spoke of it. Tired? He said. Well, I should think so. And now I will tell you all about it, since you have treated me so well. I am the spirit of the petrified man that lies across the street, there, in the museum. I am the ghost of the Cardiff giant. I can have no rest, no peace, till they have given that poor body burial again. Now, what was the most natural thing for me to do? To make men satisfy this wish. Terrify them into it, haunt the place where the body lay. So I haunted the museum night after night. I got the other spirits to help me, but it did no good, for nobody ever came to the museum at midnight. Then it occurred to me to come over the way and haunt this place a little. I felt that if I ever got a hearing, I must succeed, for I had the most efficient company that tradition could furnish. Night after night we have shivered around through these mildewed halls, dragging chains, groaning, whispering, tramping up and down stairs, till, to tell you the truth, I am almost worn out. But when I saw a little light in your room tonight, I roused my energies again, and went at it with a deal of the old freshness. But I am tired out, entirely fagged out. Give me, I beseech you, give me some hope. I lit off my perch in a burst of excitement and exclaimed, This transcends everything that ever did occur. Why, you poor blundering old fossil, you have had all your trouble for nothing. You have been haunting a plaster cast of yourself. The real Cardiff giant isn't Albany. Confound it, don't you know your own remains? I never saw such an eloquent look of shame, of pitiable humiliation, overspread a countenance before. The petrified man rose slowly to his feet and said, Honestly, is that true? As true as I am sitting here. He took the pipe from his mouth and laid it on the mantel, then stood irresolute a moment, unconsciously, from old habit, thrusting his hands where his pantaloon pocket should have been, and meditatively dropping his chin on his breast, and finally said, Well, I never felt so absurd before. The petrified man has sold everything else, and now the mean fraud has ended by selling his own ghost. My son, if there was any charity left in your heart for a poor, friendless phantom like me, don't let this get out. Think how you would feel if you had made such an ass of yourself. I heard his stately tramp die away, step by step down the stairs, and out into the deserted street, and felt sorry that he had gone, poor fellow, and sorrier still that he had carried off my red blanket and my bathtub. The end. Thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe our channel for more stories. Welcome to our channel. We hope you enjoy our narrated stories. Sedibus ut soltem placidis in morte quiscam. Virgil. In relating the circumstances which have led to my confinement within this refuge for the demented, I am aware that my present position will create a natural doubt of the authenticity of my narrative. It is an unfortunate fact that the bulk of humanity is too limited in its mental vision to weigh with patience and intelligence those isolated phenomena, seen and felt only by a psychologically sensitive few, which lie outside its common experience. Men of broader intellect know that there is no sharp distinction betwixt the real and the unreal, that all things appear as they do only by virtue of the delicate individual physical and mental media through which we are made conscious of them. But the prosaic materialism of the majority condemns as madness the flashes of supersight, penetrate the common veil of obvious empiricism. My name is Jervis Dudley, and from earliest childhood I have been a dreamer and a visionary. Wealthy beyond the necessity of a commercial life and temperamentally unfitted for the formal studies and social recreations of my acquaintances, I have dwelt ever in realms apart from the visible world,